Last week I did a long video about Dream Theater where I talked a little bit about alternating meter, which is a common way of talking about this typical prog thing where you repeat a cycle of changing meters. This video is about something much less common, but that I see as kind of related in one of the pillars of 90s slimy death metal from Obituary's Cause of Death, which asks, what if, instead of alternating meters, we alternated tempos?
Reaching off your skin, infected. Coming to the end of life.
Before I get into it, a little background. As you may know, my dissertation is roughly about tempo changes in metal, and one very fruitful and, as far as I know, completely unstudied area of this is in old school death metal. The seminal albums from the early 90s were absolutely all over the place, tempo-wise, normally with at least a few and as many as a dozen direct tempo changes in relatively short songs, and often with each new riff coming in at its own tempo, unrelated to the other riffs of the song. This Obituary song in particular has a short section with a really dense version of this, where the alternations between two different tempos come really quickly, one after the other. They could have chosen to play both riffs at the same tempo, maybe splitting the difference between the two. But they didn't. Again, here's what it actually sounds like on the recording. There are a couple links to established theories that I'm playing around with when I'm thinking about this. One of them is that one that I opened with, which is the idea that this is somehow similar to alternating meter. Abstractly, this seems to make sense, with alternating tempo as a kind of conceptual inverse to alternating meter. Because in alternating meter, the tempo stays the same, but the meter, the grouping, alternates between a few different options. In alternating tempo, it's the opposite. Meter stays the same, well, in this case at least it does, kind of, while tempo toggles back and forth between some different options. And maybe there's something there. But it really does feel completely different to play these sorts of things than it does to play alternating meter sections. Like I brought up in my most recent Carbon video, direct tempo changes feel kind of magical. I can clearly learn to play them and to feel them, but I don't really know how. It's kind of by like brute force memorization of how the two tempos feel rather than any counting or practicing slowly, which makes it very different from how I learn alternating meters. In other words, I couldn't play this very precisely without the recording or like a programmed click track, whereas like a lot of things that I learn, I could at least slow it down and play it really precisely without any click track or anything, because the tempo stays the same. And as musicians, we do so much training to keep the tempo steady, at least if you ever played jazz or if you're like learning modern metal. So this is cool because it seems like it's completely outside of that sort of tradition, and it relies on a set of skills that aren't really related. Or at least they don't really feel that related. Another idea that might be a little more relevant is the concept of tempo giusto, which was a marking on scores from before metronomes were widely used that instructed performers to choose the correct tempo, which is a skill that they would develop a context-specific feel for, given the piece's specific meter, general tempo indication, fastest and slowest note values, etc. The link between the 18th century German music theorist Johann Kernberger, who formalized a lot of these ideas, and swampy Florida death metal is that I get the feeling that every riff in these songs, and songs from around the same time by Entombed, Death, Suffocation, Morbid Angel, and others, has its own particular tempo where the band agrees that it should be based on how it sounds and how it feels to play on their instruments and you know, how the crowd feels and whatever else. And clearly on these early albums, this is more important to them than keeping up a continuous tempo between the riffs. I don't know if there's really like a single perfect tempo for every riff, but I do like the effect of this change, and I like thinking of it in this way. The idea that for the band, like every riff has its own specific tempo that it should be played at, and they're gonna find that together, and it doesn't matter, like it might not be the same as the riff before, it might be a little different, it might be very different, but there's this kind of like unevenness that I really like. I think it makes things feel kind of like handmade and very nuanced in a way that can get flattened out in more metronomic performances. I should also maybe point out that it may seem like this makes it similar to classical music, which takes a much looser approach to time than popular music. However, it's not really the same, because in Obituary and all these old school death metal bands, it's not like the tempo is dragging and rushing expressively within riffs, really. Things are very precise and consistent at a given tempo for a given riff. It's just that at the edges of these riffs, they jump up and down in tempo. It's moving riff to riff where there are these sudden tempo discontinuities. Anyway, here's this section again just for fun. So this tempo flexibility, or this tempo jumpiness, seems to get phased out by the end of the 90s. For Obituary, their 2005 comeback album, Frozen in Time, feels worlds away from their first few albums, partly because almost every song on it stays at one tempo the whole way through. I don't know if this is because they started tracking to a click, as in I actually don't know whether they did that, but it kind of sounds like it, or because of a larger aesthetic shift in death metal towards groovier, more repetitive stuff, which is cool and fun, but I personally also miss the really loose, slimy, evil feel of the constant tempo changes in the death metal albums that came out before this larger shift. At the very least, I feel like these tempo changes make for a more exciting listen, because I have to kind of keep renegotiating how I'm headbanging with almost every new riff. So anyway, what do you all think? Does anyone actually know anything concrete about the history of click tracks in death metal? I've looked a little, but I haven't seen anything. It seems kind of like this sort of thing is like taboo, like bands do not like talking about the mechanics of making this music. Or do you think the change was part of a stylistic / aesthetic shift to more precise and repetitive tracking and composition in metal? How are you doing in life? I hope well. Let me know. See ya.